Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today we're going to take a look at a Netflix animated feature. It's fairly recent from Skydance Animation, which, for those of you who aren't aware of that, Skydance Animation is currently run by a former Pixar and Disney head. A former disgraced Pixar and Disney head. Yes, I'm talking about John Lasseter, the guy who essentially, for a lot of people, created Pixar. Not entirely, but he was one of the founding members. He was one of the guys who built it up. I am not taking that away from him. I do think that John Lasseter, before knowing all the stuff that we know, which is still not a whole lot, seemed like a pretty great filmmaker. And for the most part, I do think that during his run under Pixar and Disney, he was doing really good work. Though, ever since it came to light that he was apparently sexually harassing people at Pixar and Disney, it's become pretty clear that maybe there might have been something else helping him out. I don't know what exactly, but his Skydance Animation run has not been great. I've talked about Look before, which was their first feature. Horrible movie. Did not watch Spellbound. But I heard some pretty good things about their newest feature, Swapped. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. So Swapped, previously titled Puku, is the story about a little otter creature known as a puku. Essentially, this is a world where animals are mixed with nature. So you got things like birds who have leaves for feathers, fishes who have leaves on their bodies, specifically seaweed, wolves with trees on their back, and all kinds of things. Like there's even a deer that's made up of trees. It's a pretty neat idea, I will say that much. The idea of having nature mixed with animal is great. The only downside to it is that the main creature we follow, the puku, is given the short end of the stick. They literally just look like otters. There's nothing about them that screams weird, different creature. It's just, that's an otter. I don't know. But yeah, the movie is about this whole world with these creatures. The main one we follow is a puku, voiced by Michael B. Jordan. It's told a story about how there used to be these little pods that would make you into another creature. So essentially, these pods would teach you about other creatures, and they would learn about you, and animals in this world knew each other very well. Fine for a concept, and things get tricky when the Michael B. Jordan Puku character changes into a rival bird species named the Javin, and later on he meets up with another Javin voiced by Juno Temple, who herself gets changed into a Puku, and it's up to them to find more pods to get themselves turned back to their right creatures and learn a lesson about being good with each other. They get help from one of the seaweed fish creatures named the Boogle. This character is voiced by Tracy Morgan, and together they eventually have to outrun this creature known as the Firewolf, who, according to the old story, is the reason why these pods are so hard to find and why nature is divided. Not a bad premise to go by. So is the movie good? For something that I saw people hyping up online, I have to admit, to an extent, I get that it is better than Luck. Again, I didn't see Spellbound, so I can't say anything about that. And it's not the worst movie I've seen all year, but it is pretty bad. I'm sorry, I just cannot get around it. This is not a good movie. It's got a whole lot going on. The whole thing with the creatures is pretty interesting, but the lore doesn't really make much sense, and it gets even more annoying when you realize that there's characters who should know what's going on, but either through contrivances where they don't hear things, or for that specific moment, they just don't seem to believe the story of these swapping pods, even though going by when we first learned about it, it seems to be like this pretty important story that gets passed around through generations by the various creatures because of, the state of their world. So it becomes this whole thing where it's like, wait a second, so if this is such an important story, how come your family members or whoever don't seem to believe that this is a thing that's going on right now, even though this is a thing that apparently they were telling you, like, hey, this actually did happen once, and it's why we're not interacting with other animals. It's such a bizarre choice. But yeah, there's a whole lot going on with this movie. Going by the title of the movie, Swapped, you'd assume that this is a body swap movie, and it kind of is, but realistically, it's shape-shifting pods, so it's not like they're actually swapping bodies. So yeah, Michael B. Jordan just becomes a bird version of his own character, whereas Juno Temple just becomes an otter version of her character, which, okay, fine. I mean, it's different creatures, so at the very least, it creates that tension. But at the same time, it's just like, okay, so they're not actually becoming each other. So again, it's not a body swap. I have to wonder if part of that was just because, like, okay, they're already becoming different creatures. If they also swap genders, it's going to be a little weird. And, we don't want to get into that. How are they going to react to being, a female or a male on top of being a different creature? Even though I feel like, yeah, you probably would have to question that. But it wouldn't be anything that I don't know. I don't think it would be inappropriate. But then again, given how anti-trans a lot of places are, including the U.S., if we're being honest, unfortunately, it seems like they want to avoid that kind of stuff, just to avoid the possibility of maybe raising interest to it. I don't know if that's the main reason why this doesn't delve into that, but it would not surprise me. But yeah, you got that on top of the whole thing with, like, all these species are all separated, and then there's the whole thing with the firewolf, like, okay, this is the creature of lore, and eventually it turns out that he's still running around, and it's like, it gets to a point where it feels like it's way too much. And yeah, some of it you can connect easily, because, like, the whole idea of, like, okay, well, they're going to be shape-shifting to each other to learn a thing or two about each other. It matches up with the whole idea of, like, hey, these characters are separate. That way, this is what brings them together. But still, it's just the way that it's delivered that makes it feel clunky. And that's the whole thing about the movie, is that it's very clunky. And when it's not, it's generic. And unfortunately, it being generic means that I really just do not care. It's like, look, I've seen these characters before. I've seen the plot beats essentially before. Even if the way some of it is mixed and matched is a little different, it results in it feeling like it's just something that I've already seen. And the sad thing is that part of me does wish that it was better. The creature designs, I think, are pretty cool. Again, the puku, the main thing we're following, gets the short end of the stick because they're just otters, so it's not even that interesting. But for what it's worth, it's still cute designs. I mean, I can still tell the characters apart, whether it's Michael B. Jordan or Juno Temple when they become these creatures, or even, Cedric the Entertainer plays Michael B. Jordan's father, who has a very distinct mustache. That kind of stuff. It's like, okay, it's fine. It works. But none of it is utilized in a way where it makes me feel wowed by it. The animation can at times be kind of nice when the characters, in very few moments, just shut up and let the animation speak for itself. So it becomes this whole thing where it's like, okay, well, that's a nice demo. It's not anything too special. I've seen better looking animated features, but for what it's worth, seeing animals do animal stuff and whatnot is pretty neat. They do talk a lot, and unfortunately a lot of that humor is very generic. So on top of already having a lot of generic stuff within the characters, within the plots, even the comedy is very generic. The movie opens with a freeze frame with a character saying, "Oh, bet you're wondering how I got here." So it's exactly like the meme. And the rest of the movie just kind of follows in that format where it's just like, hey, it's kind of quirky. If you've ever seen any comedy from, like, the last few decades, it's there. It's annoying. It's dumb. I don't care. Which, again, is a shame, because I'm like, obviously, the first thing that always comes to mind is, like, I'd rather watch a good movie over a bad movie. I'd rather cheer for filmmakers rather than go against them. We'll talk about Lasseter in a bit, but for the most part, it's like, okay, well, this was from the director of Tangled, though apparently in name only, because apparently he wasn't too proud of what happened. And again, when it is a nature movie, it's fine. Like, I saw people who complained about this, comparing it to Hoppers, and yeah, to an extent, it's kind of like that because it is a movie about a creature becoming a different creature, and the third act is pretty much the same with a big fire breaking out. Spoilers, but whatever. And the message about unifying different creatures feels kind of similar, even though technically in Hoppers, it really wasn't about unifying different creatures. They were already kind of unified. But okay, so there are similarities to Hoppers. I personally never was bothered by that. Like, as much as I really don't like this movie, I kind of felt like, okay, in its defense, I feel like you guys who are comparing this to Hoppers as to why it's bad are being a bit silly. Because there's other reasons why it's bad, and it's not that it reminds anyone of Hoppers. I think that's like among the least of this movie's problems. One thing I wanted to emphasize on this was the swapping aspect of this movie. Body swap is, I don't want to say it's too common of a trope in movies or shows, but it is common enough to know what we can expect to see with that. It's not really a genre, it's just like, I guess, a thing that they use in stories. And we always see the same things. The opposites swapping so they learn a lesson, and as they become each other, they get to understand each other's struggles, they understand the rewards of each life, and so on and so forth. That is kind of what this movie does, even though it's essentially not really a body swap movie, because again, it is just the characters shape-shifting, which, yeah, technically that could be viewed as a form of body swapping, but I still view it different enough to where it's like, okay, well, you're not doing exactly that, even though you're naming your movie Swapped. It's more about shape-shifting. Some of you may say same difference. Again, I feel like the difference is that, well, if it was a body swap movie, you probably would have had a scene where one character interacts with someone they know, and they'd have to act out in a way where it's like, okay, well, we're familiar with the person, and we're trying to act like the other person, whatever, that kind of thing, rather than just being themselves, but as these creatures. And then on top of that, with the gender difference, you might have gotten a scene where a character makes a joke about it, or they acknowledge like, hey, look, being a female is different from being a male in some way, even though they're different creatures, so it's already so different that I can't imagine them sharing in this way. But, that's what movies are about. They're about finding ways to make two opposites share in their troubles. So just because I can't think of a way to have them share their troubles if they just swapped bodies doesn't mean that no one else can. That being said, my problem here is really about the fact that despite it being a swapping movie with a very unique mechanic of doing it with these little pods and, turning into different creatures, it's still pretty lazily done. It's still the story about two opposites who can't get along and having to learn how to get along. It barely touches upon them arguing with each other because it's, got that thing that a lot of modern movies do, especially animated movies, where it's like, okay, we already established this thing, we gotta move on to the next ploppy, we gotta move on. We don't stop and breathe for a little bit, and as a result, it's like, okay, so you already get this idea of like, okay, these characters are now these two creatures, and while they do have like a moment of like, okay, let's show off like our new abilities, like, okay, Juno Temple learns how to smell with her nose because she becomes an otter, and Michael B. Jordan learns how to fly because he becomes a bird. There's really nothing here that stands out. It's still just, okay, these two characters don't understand each other. They learn to get along, and they learn to utilize the abilities of the other. But I'm like, okay, this is a thing that doesn't happen in a lot of Saw movies, and I do understand why. But I do kind of wish that more of them would acknowledge this. Like, okay, if you're in a different body, the way you move is gonna change along with it. And yeah, they do try to do it where it's like, okay, look, the bird, once she becomes an otter, tries to, like when she's moving, she's still trying to move as if she's like in her, bird body. But it's like, if these two are in fact in new bodies, shouldn't they struggle a little bit more? Like, shouldn't you have a scene where it's like, okay, this person is struggling to walk because their legs are so big now that they can't properly gauge where each step is at, or because they're smaller, they're still moving as if they're big, but they're not realizing that they're much smaller. Just stuff like that. The implications of what were to come from a situation like this. The problem is that it's like, yes, the characters are going to be learning about how it's like to be the different creature, but realistically, it's only done in a very surface level where it's like, okay, the Puku character, the otter, is just going to be learning how birds flap their wings, how they fly, and the Javan, the bird character, is just going to learn how to essentially smell like an otter. That's pretty much about as far as it goes. They learn about what they can't do, what they can do. That's it. And it sucks because I kind of feel like, okay, one thing that I would like to see more from like body swapping movies and whatnot, like whenever they do these, that I feel like is just the first thing that always comes to mind. But I feel like a lot of these just skip over it. It's just the idea of like, hey, if you're in a different body, you'd probably struggle to move right away. And yeah, they sometimes do gags about how they can't do certain things or how their sizes are different. But I feel like it's always just the bare minimum. Like with this is like, okay, Michael B. Jordan's character is, now a bird, so he kind of struggles to move a little bit and doesn't realize that he can fly. But it's like, okay, he's still using his wings like hands, which, yeah, I know cartoon thing, but it's kind of like, you'd figure that there would be a little bit more of a struggle in using his wings as hands at first, or with the way his legs, are built. It's completely different from the way he normally has it. So, you'd think that he'd be stumbling a lot more. And yeah, he stumbles, but it's like, it's more or less just like, okay, well, he just stumbles. Like, I feel like there'd be more interesting stuff that you can do if you actually, went in on the mechanics. And again, it doesn't even really matter because it's not like they have to deal with interacting with other characters all that much in this form. The one character that they're mostly interacting with is kind of aware that they're not these creatures because they tell them right away, like, hey, we're not actually this. But there's really not much. At the closest we get is just like, okay, here's the initial scene of Michael B. Jordan being cast out from his people because they think that he essentially killed himself. And that whole scene is kind of ridiculous because it's like, one, you guys know the story, you should know what's going on, even more so because he tries to explain it, but they don't understand. And two, even with the explanation, I do feel like, okay, for the Michael B. Jordan character, he could have explained it a little bit better. Like, I feel like it's one of those movies where it's like the characters are refusing to mention certain details when it's necessary just to get the plot going, which is annoying. He does also meet with Juno Temple's sisters when they first meet each other. So it's like, okay, so he's trying to explain that he's not one of them, but they think he's brain damaged, which admittedly is one of the few funny jokes in the movie when you see like the whole montage of why they think he's brain damaged. But it's like, okay, those are the only times that these characters ever interact with anyone in a way where it's like, okay, let's see how them being in a new body presents themselves to others. Like, the movie automatically goes into like, okay, we gotta get to the plot, we gotta do this. It's like, it'd be nice if they had like little moments where they each had to deal with the creatures that they are now inhabiting doing these things. And it would have been even nicer if, in my opinion, if it was an actual body swap, just because you could have actually had the characters. And yeah, this is a typical thing where the characters interact with people who think that they're who they are. You didn't need to do that, but I think it would have been better for this story just because it's like, hey, look, it's two different creatures. Like, let's do that. But of course, it's still annoying because the characters are obviously two different genders. So if they had done the body swap thing, there might have been an interesting discussion held right there. But it's not. I don't know if it's just that they feared that it might have been too perverted to go that way, or that they assumed that if they do that, it might raise questions of, being trans, and they don't want to tackle that because, unfortunately, a lot of the world is very conservative. But, I don't know, I just feel like they could have done something interesting with doing that aspect without having to go too adult or even dirty for that matter. Instead, it's just every body swap movie that you've ever seen, if not even more generic and lazy than usual. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this genre just because, if you could even call it a genre, just because a lot of these movies like Freaky Friday, there's so many Freaky Fridays, are often just the laziest versions of what they could be, with the only real redeeming value with a lot of these just being like, well, it's kind of fun seeing the actors act like someone else, but I don't know, actors act like different people all the time, so it's not even that amusing. And look, with John Lasseter being involved with this, I get that the movie doesn't deserve to be good. John Lasseter does not deserve a win after doing all that sexual harassment shit and Disney still refusing to release the information. Sorry for all the noise, it's gotten noisy. But could you at least try? Like, there's a part of me that still feels like, okay, well, if you were gonna be seeing this guy do stuff, if we're gonna be seeing him work in the industry, which, again, he shouldn't, it would be nice if it's like, okay, at least the art is good. Because, that's the common thing that people always do. Like, oh, separate the art from the artist. And it's like, no, the guy sucks. The movie sucks. I don't know. Apparently there was stories about how the director, Nathan Grano, wanted to remove his name from this. I don't know how true that is. But it would not surprise me because the story has so many things going on that you kind of feel like, okay, yeah, this is the product of someone messing with a movie. It doesn't even really matter because it still comes off as one of the most generic animated features around. I know I've been saying that a lot, but it's like, if you've seen any Pixar or Disney movie from the past, 30 years, you've seen this movie. The whole thing kind of hinges on this big twist towards the end where one of the characters, I'm not going to spoil too much, but one of the characters who we think is good is not good. And you kind of already know that the character's not going to be good because the character has been constantly having knowledge and, is fully aware of what's going on. And it's like, okay, well, how does this character know about all these things unless they're the person that the story, early on in the movie was about, the Firewolf. And, of course, you realize, like, oh, well, yeah, that character's the Firewolf. He just was pretending to be something else and was looking for these shape-shifting pods to return to his form. Which it doesn't even make sense, really, because you're kind of like, wait a second, if you knew all these locations, how come you never figured it out? Because, the assumption is that this has been going on for who knows how long. I at first thought it was like a centuries-old story. Now I'm starting to doubt whether it's even all that much from a generation, which probably explains why people don't believe it, even though they treat it as if it's like the most important story of the world or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of like, okay, so if you've had all this time to figure this out, to know where you're at, surely one of those should have been close enough for you to get easily without needing any kind of help. Or you should have been able to figure out how to get around whatever obstacle you had. Because, there are obstacles, before the big twist happens. And I'm like, you probably should have been able to figure out a way to get around this obstacle ages ago. But again, the movie doesn't really think about this stuff. And it's like, the whole idea of like a good character being evil, whatever, that's a twist for whatever. But like with animated movies, it feels like this was a great idea back when Pixar first did it with like Toy Story 2. And it's like now it's been, run to the ground. Yes, Pixar still manages to find some interesting ways to do it. Disney, not as much, but they have the occasional one that works. And, other studios have done it, of course, as well. But it's kind of like, in order for it to work, you have to really sell us on the idea of like, okay, maybe this character isn't the villain, or, you have to give us a great motivation. You have to give us a reason to care that this character is a villain. And the movie certainly doesn't. And even beyond that, it still just does a bunch of stuff that we've seen everywhere. The movie opens with a freeze frame, as I said earlier. The jokes are pretty much the generic variety. Even the main character essentially acts like Flick from A Bug's Life for a good portion of it, and it's just like, what were we doing here, guys? I don't know. Like, it just feels like there was so many ideas. There was really no reason to put this out the way it is, other than, of course, financial reasons, because they already dumped the money and they got to put out something. But it's very clear that this thing needed another 2, maybe 3 passes at the story, because it's like, there is an interesting idea right there with the whole idea of this nature, these creatures being tree life, and the fact that there's just like this whole shape-shifting pod and learning to work together and whatnot. But the movie just does not sell it. By the end of this, I was just kind of like, okay, why were they separated to begin with? Like, I understand that the Firewolf came in and killed essentially like the creatures that created these pods that shapeshift, and that scared off a bunch of people from ever using them because this evil wolf became a fire version of himself through it, though it does make you wonder why no one else considered countering it by becoming like a water creature or something like that. But whatever. It just makes you think like, well, wouldn't the other creatures just be like, okay, we can all work together except the wolves? And that could have been the story, like, okay, maybe we follow one of the wolves that's trying to prove like, okay, not all wolves are evil. And that could have been like the more interesting message for, unity. Having it just be, like the wolf, it's like, well, everyone should be teaming up against the wolf because it's clearly that one person is the problem, not the other things. And, again, you could have had that be the message like, hey, maybe wolves aren't so bad. It's just, that one guy was kind of a piece of shit. It's such a dumb movie. But to its small credit, again, creative stuff, and the few scenes where they are silent are cute. So at the very least, it's not the worst movie I've seen all year. That still goes to a movie that I can't really talk about until it's officially out, but just to say, it'll piss off a lot of its fans because it's a movie out of a beloved franchise, is what I'll say. But yeah, I thought that was much worse. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.
I'm done. I'm not wasting another second on you because all you've ever done is ruin my life.
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.